The road to Damascus stretched long and pale through the Syrian wilderness, cutting through a landscape of limestone hills and wind-bent scrub, baked gold and bone white under the late morning sun. It was a road that merchants knew well, that pilgrims traveled in singing groups, that soldiers marched with the rhythmic patience of men who had marched before. But on this particular morning, somewhere around the year 34, in the reign of Tiberius Caesar, the man walking at the head of a small company of travelers was none of these things. He was a hunter. His name was Saul, Saul of Tarsus, a small man by most accounts, intense and quick-eyed, with the posture of someone who had spent years inside synagogues and academies, bending over scrolls, arguing points of law with the focused energy of a man who believed that precision mattered because truth mattered and truth was everything. He had been trained at the feet of Gamaliel, one of the most respected teachers in all of Jerusalem, and he wore that education like armor. He knew the law. He knew the prophets. He knew, with a certainty that ran all the way to his marrow, what faithfulness to the God of Israel looked like, and what it did not. And these followers of the man called Jesus of Nazareth? These people of the way? They were a threat, a contagion, a lie dressed in the language of resurrection. Saul had already watched a young man named Stephen die under a rain of stones, and he had not thrown a stone himself. He had simply stood nearby, holding the coats of those who did, and approved. The word in the original language is chilling in its bureaucratic coldness. He approved. Now he was on his way to Damascus with letters from the high priest, official authorization to enter the synagogues there, identify any followers of Jesus, bind them, and drag them back to Jerusalem for punishment. Men, women, both. The letters made no distinction. He walked with purpose, with righteousness, with the absolute and terrible confidence of a man who believes God is on his side. And then the sky fell open. It happened without warning. No clouds gathered. No thunder rolled in from the distance to give a man a moment to prepare his heart. One instant Saul was walking in the sharp Syrian noon, squinting against the dust, and the next, the light. Not sunlight. This was not the sun. The sun was up there in the sky doing what it always did, and this was something else entirely. This was light that came from no direction and every direction at once, light so intense and so sudden that every man in the company staggered. They heard something, a sound like a voice, though they could not make out the words, a rushing sound that some of them would later describe as thunder. They froze. Some of them fell. And Saul went down to the ground completely, face first into the Damascus road, into the grit and the dust and the heat radiating up from the pale stones. And from within the light, a voice. Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? The repetition of the name, that doubling, was not accident. In Hebrew tradition, when God called a name twice, it marked a moment of profound importance. Abraham, Abraham, Moses, Moses, and now, Saul, Saul. The man on the ground was shaking. Every theology he had ever built, every argument he had ever won, every midnight he had ever spent studying scripture by lamplight, all of it was crumbling in the presence of something he had no category for. He pressed his hands against the road. He could feel his own heartbeat in his palms. Who are you, Lord? He managed. The word he used, Lord, was instinctive. Whatever this was, it was not less than a human being. It was more. Whatever this was, it held absolute authority over the moment and over him. And the answer came back with a simplicity that must have shattered him completely. I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. Jesus, the one he had decided was a fraud. The one whose followers he had dragged from their homes in the dark hours of the morning, whose faces had looked back at him with something he had chosen to call delusion. Jesus, who had been crucified, who had been sealed in a tomb, who was supposed to be finished, defeated, a chapter closed. I am Jesus. The theology didn't shatter all at once. It collapsed slowly, the way a wall collapses, stone by stone, the mortar giving way. If Jesus was speaking to him from within a light that no human hand had kindled, then Jesus was alive. And if Jesus was alive, then the resurrection was not a lie. And if the resurrection was not a lie, then Stephen had not died for a delusion. Then the people Saul had dragged through the streets were not heretics, they were witnesses. And Saul, with his letters and his certainty and his borrowed righteousness. Saul was the one who had been wrong. He lay on the road. He did not move. Rise, the voice told him, and go into the city, and you will be told what to do. When Saul finally stood up, slow and unsteady, the men around him were silent and wide-eyed and afraid. They helped him to his feet, and someone may have taken his arm, and that is when Saul discovered that he could not see. The light had left him blind. He stretched his hands out in front of him like a man reaching into darkness, and that is exactly what he was. They led him by the hand into Damascus. This man who had come to the city as a captor arriving now as a captive. This man who had come to bind others now needing someone to guide his every step. For 3 days he neither ate nor drank. He sat in a house on a street called Straight, a long, colonnaded avenue that still runs through Damascus today, and he prayed. He prayed in the dark behind his ruined eyes, and whatever he prayed, Scripture doesn't tell us. But you can imagine a man going back over everything. Every face he had frightened, every family he had torn apart, every moment he had stood before men and women whose only crime was believing that a carpenter from Galilee had walked out of a tomb, and he had called them criminals for it. 3 days of darkness, 3 days of silence and fasting, and the slowly arriving recognition that everything he had known, he had needed to unknow. Then a man named Ananias came to him. Ananias had received a vision of his own, one in which God had told him to go find the man who had been the church's most feared enemy and lay hands on him and restore his sight. Ananias had hesitated. Lord, I have heard about this man. I know what he has done. But he went. He went because love is often indistinguishable from courage. He found Saul in the house on Straight Street, and he put his hands on him, and he called him brother, and from Saul's eyes, something like scales fell away, and he could see again. He was baptized that same day. He ate for the first time in 3 days. And Saul of Tarsus, the man with the letters and the certainty and the approved stonings, began the longest journey of his life, traveling in exactly the opposite direction from the one he had started. What do we make of a story like this? A man galloping toward destruction, absolutely convinced he is doing God's will, and God meets him not with judgment, not with the punishment he had arguably earned, but with light and a question. Why are you persecuting me? Not a verdict. A question. An invitation to stop and look honestly at what he was doing and who he had become. There's something quietly undoing about that. Most of us do not expect to meet grace at the moment of our worst selves. We expect, maybe, patience. We expect the long, slow chance to improve before we are really encountered. But the story of Saul on the Damascus road suggests something more radical, that the light can find us in the middle of our most confident wrongness and choose, instead of condemning us, to call our name. Twice. The experience didn't make Paul perfect. He would struggle and argue and worry and confess his own failures in letter after letter, scrawled in the firelight of one city after another. But he would also write, in one of those letters to a church in Rome, that nothing in all creation could separate us from the love of God. He knew, because something had found him on a road when he was going the wrong way and refused to let him go. And sometimes the most dramatic conversion in history is simply a man learning to see.